In this video, we're going to go over how to edit neon titles for After Effects. What's up guys, my name is Thomas, I'm the author of the project file, and this is a free project file for personal use. If you're going to make money from it, please purchase a commercial license. Alright, so go to the description, go get the project file, come back here and follow along step by step. And if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, I'd really appreciate it. Alright you guys, let's do it. Before we dig into After Effects, I just want to make sure that you have the font included installed, because the font is actually the wires, and this will allow you to very quickly add wires to your neon. So go to the download, and then within the font folder, make sure that you have this font installed. Okay, once we have that installed, then we can dig into After Effects. So what I want you to do is make sure you have your Essential Graphics panel enabled. So go to Window, and then Essential Graphics, and then the Effect Controls panel, Window, and then down here, Effect Controls, and then your project panel and timeline should be open by default, but just in case, whatever. Window, Project right there, and then Timeline. Make sure that this one and this one are enabled. And then you can take and dock and move these around so that they match what you're seeing here. Moving on, we have neon, glow settings, animation, scenes, and extras. And I'm going to break these tutorials down into these 5 areas so that you feel very comfortable in all the different settings. And I'm going to go through each one individually so you can use this as a reference later. All right, and then one other thing I want to mention before we dig into the neon is that I have shy layers enabled. So like if you're editing something in After Effects and you want to edit this, make sure you have this disabled so you can see all the layers in the timeline. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's go to our neon in the Essential Graphics panel and twirl that down. So this is where all the main settings for the neon are going to be, and let's go through these one at a time. So the first one is enable or disable. So just in case you want to disable the neon, you probably don't want to, but I could see an argument where you might want it, so I included it in there. We have a color option, so you can very quickly go in and just change the color, and it will automatically update the color of the neon to that color. And then I would recommend staying in the range of like here for color. You don't want to get too bright or too white, or unless you want it white, of course. But this is my recommendation. You can do whatever you want. We have the source text, and this is where the main input's going to be. So if I type in example in here, you can see that not only will it update the neon, which is cool, but it updates the wires and the mount, which is such a huge time saver. So if I go to the size and I make that smaller, for example, that will also update all of the details on the neon automatically. So hopefully you guys appreciate that, because that was like the thing I wanted this template to do, was be fast to work with. Because with Neon Sign Kit, it's like it's great at certain things, but this was not a simple thing to do in Neon Sign Kit. So let's move on. You can adjust the font here, and in the download list I included some recommended fonts. I couldn't include them in the download, but you can go download them yourself and give credit to whoever made it. So we have the style, the faux styles, if you want to edit these. We have the position, so if you want to move it around in the scene, you can do that. And again, it will automatically move all the mount and wires and everything in the scene as well. We have the line spacing, so not only will it work with one line of text, but you can have multiple lines of text in there, and it will automatically create the wires, create the extended mount, but you can adjust the line spacing here, like if you don't want these to overlap, and that will automatically move that. You can see that a couple things with the wires. You can see that it's creating the exact same wire with the same text, and they're not quite lined up where they're supposed to be. We'll fix that later, but for now, just know that that's a really easy fix. So I'm going to undo, and I'm just going to twirl this up and down, because sometimes it doesn't properly display unless you twirl it up and down. Next we have the tracking, so you can increase the tracking or decrease on the text if you want. Some neons kind of have that look where the letters are really spaced out, and some are super close together. Whatever you think looks good in your neon. You can rotate the neon, you can increase the texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the current time indicator and go to the very beginning of the scene. So the neon is off right now, and this is more so visible when the neon is off, but it has a little bit of texture on there, and you can increase that. I'm going to go way up on it so you can see it more clearly, but actually let's go way up. So now we can start to see that kind of noise and texture in there, and it might work well in certain scenes, but I can say that having it with no texture looks less realistic in most scenes. So I added that feature in there to just be, I don't know, I guess in that like lower 10-20 mark, looks pretty realistic and adds a little bit of texture to it. We have choke. So most neons, especially digital created neons, have this problem of not looking real if they're really thick. So I created this option for choke that you can just go in and increase that, and it will decrease the size, the thickness of the neon. That obviously is too much, but you get the idea that with a thick font, it would help out quite a bit. I'll just give you an example of that. So I'm gonna go to a font. We'll go to Gotham Black, okay? So not great. Like this would not look like a realistic neon. It's gonna look really blown out and not look good. So the first thing you could do is you could thin out the font with the choke option, but you're gonna run into problems where like thicker and thinner parts of the neon make it look not realistic. If this is the case, if choke isn't doing a good job, what I would recommend then is to go down to the outline font and enable that, and then that will create lines around the thick font that look much more realistic than trying to thin out a thick font. Okay, so I'm gonna undo some of those steps I just did, and we're gonna go back down. So displacement, so especially with creating a neon from text, a lot of times what happens is it doesn't look real because the text is too perfect. And we want a little bit of variation in the text, and that's what displacement allows on here. So I'm gonna turn it way up. I don't think you should go this high, but to show you what it's doing, it's kind of distorting the text a little bit, making it look not perfect. So 0, if you're going for speed, is fine, but adding a little bit in there does help to make it look a little bit more realistic. So next we have the off lightness and off saturation, and these kind of work together. So what you want to do is like look in your scene and see how dark should this neon be. So we can go to one extreme and have the lightness at 0, so it's completely black. It's probably not realistic in this scene. There's a little bit of light happening. So somewhere where I had it, like in the 60, 80, if we go up higher though, you can see the opposite problem. This is too bright for the scene. I wanted a neon file that worked both with dark scenes and light scenes. And if you have a light scene, you really want to be able to control the lightness of that. And I'll show you that in a little bit in the scene tutorial, but just know that there is a reason why you might want your neon to be this bright. Okay, so I'm gonna bring this back over here. Let's say that you wanted no color visible when the neon is off. You can turn the off saturation all the way down, and that'll be black and white. Or if you want quite a bit of color to still show through, that's kind of a personal preference. Somewhere, I don't know, in the middle is usually a good route to shoot for. Okay, so I'm gonna turn the off lightness down a little bit more, and I'm gonna show you what the shine does. So I'll move it all the way up to 100%. You can see that it adds this shine. Real neons, they do have a reflection to them. And since we can't do real reflections in After Effects, it's kind of like faking what it should look like. All right, so that's everything for the neon settings. Let's dig in next into the glow settings. First one we have is the bulb brightness, and what this allows you to do is increase the direct illumination on the bulb and the immediate area around it. The next is the glow amount and glow radius. These kind of work together, and it's how much overall glow do we want on the neon and how far do we want that glow to go in the scene. Next, we have an actual scene glow. So this is an illumination directly projected onto the background to help make the scene look more realistic. And then visible illumination is just that. It's the illumination that you can see coming off of the bulb if you want that on or off. Next, we have bulb variance. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn the bulb brightness all the way down. And so you can start to see the bulb variance in here. It's like how it's a little bit brighter here and a little bit darker here. And especially at a lower brightness setting, it makes it look way more realistic than just a kind of flat, bright neon. Next we have character, so I'm going to undo some of these. Next we have the character brightness variation. So one thing to be able to tell from here is like the E is definitely less bright than the N and the O. And this was on purpose. I actually kind of prefer this. I think it creates more contrast for the bright elements if not all the elements are the same level of brightness. So what you can do is you can turn this completely off so that there's no character variance. These will all be the same amount of glow happening in them. But if you like that kind of look of some characters being a little bit less bright than others, I also included this seed random because maybe you don't want the E to be the character that's not as bright. Maybe you want a different one. So what you can do is just move the character brightness over, and that should randomly select a different character to not be as bright. So that is everything with glow settings. Let's dig into animation next. So let's twirl that down, and the first thing we're going to go over is start and end. And the comment says, should the neon be on or off at start? And we have start off and end off. So what this means is if I bring the current time indicator over to frame 0, the neon is off. So if I turn start on, that means that the neon will be on when the animation starts. Now you can control with this start time when the neon turns on. So we have start time in seconds and frames. This project is set up at 30 frames per second. So for every 30 frames, it will create 1 second. So by default, it's set to at 5 frames turn on. So if we bring the current time indicator forward 5 frames, and you can see that right here that we're forward 5 frames, then if we go forward 1 more, it's going to start to turn on. Let's say that we want it to start at 15 frames. So we'll put 15 in there, and then we'll move the current time indicator forward 15 frames, and it's still off. Move forward 1 more, it begins to turn on at 16 frames. Let's say we want it to turn on at 1 second, 15 frames. So what we're going to do is set that and then go forward 1 second, 15 frames, go forward 1 more, and we can see that it's turning on. And then we have the same setup for when the neon turns off. Should it be off at the end of your animation? And you'll control the duration for how long you want the comp to be, but you can choose when you want it to be off. And it's kind of a cool system so that you don't ever have to add keyframes. You just set the end time and then it will turn off. So by default, it's set to 5 seconds turn off. So bring the current time indicator to 5 seconds and let it render. And you'll notice that it's actually off. So it doesn't begin to turn off at 5 seconds. It is off. If I go back 1 frame, you can see that it's still turning off. And then it's fully off at 5 seconds. So let's say, for example, we want it to turn off at 6 seconds. We'll just set 6 in there, go forward to 6 seconds, and it is off. So you get the idea? Next, we have the animators. And these create a really powerful way that you can animate individual parts of your neon or the whole neon and customize when that animation happens. So let me show you what I mean. If we twirl down animator A, we have enable the animation, the same thing as we saw earlier, time, seconds, and frames, the position, X size, and Y size. So in order to see these animators, what we're going to have to do, I'm going to bring first the current time indicator over to 2 seconds so we can see the neon on, and then I'm going to enable edit mode. Now what edit mode does is it creates a very stripped version of the scene with just your neon so that you can see the animators. So I'm going to turn on animator A, and we can see that we have this square. So this is the animator, and this allows us to see where the animator is in the scene. So let's say that, for example, we want the E to flicker on. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the size, we're going to make it narrower, and then we're going to move the position over just so that the square is covering only the E. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to choose from the drop down. How do we want it to animate? So we have 6 options set up. Animate on allows you to animate one part of your neon on separately from the rest of the neon. Animate off, same thing, you can animate one part off. Loop on and off means that it will just kind of create this loop of on, off, on, off. Same with loop off, it's the same thing, it just starts off, depending on like how you want your animation to begin. Flicker once, you can set a specific time where it will flicker, and flicker for 5 seconds, it will randomly flicker for 5 seconds from the time that you set. So let's say we want it to flicker once, and we want it to flicker at 2 seconds. So the current time indicator is at 2 seconds right now. So we can see from this edit mode kind of what's going to happen. It's going to flicker right there. So let's turn edit mode off. So we're seeing the live version of it. So I'm just going to cut to when the RAM previewing is done so you can see the result. There, and now you can see what this looks like in real time. So it just creates a really subtle, nice flicker on that E. All right, so let's do one more example using animator B. Because remember, you can have up to 3 different animators happening in the scene at a time. So let's say, for example, currently we have the neon starting at 1 second, 15 frames. So let's say that we want maybe the second N to animate on at 2 seconds. So we have enable turned on, edit mode turned on. Let's make the size narrower, something like, I don't know, 250. And then we'll move the position over to the second N over here, a little bit more. And let's have time seconds at 2 seconds, so it's already set up for us. And then what I'm going to do is turn this off. And then I'm going to RAM preview from 0 and cut to when this is done previewing so you can see the final result. All right, so I'm just going to scrub forward so you can see what's happening. So at 1 second, 15 frames, the neon turns on. And then at 2 seconds, two things are happening. Remember, because we have two animators going. It's flickering the E at 2 seconds, and it's animating on the second N. See? So play back in real time. Cool. All right, so that's everything for animating the neon. Let's go over animating the camera. So first we have, we're going to skip wiggle loop for a second and go right to animate in/out. So the duration is set to 5 seconds. The Z position starts at 0 and ends at 100. So what this allows you to do is to basically animate without using keyframes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move the current time indicator and scrub it forward, and you can see that the camera is animating towards the neon in. So we set the duration to 5. So from 0 to 5 seconds, it's going in. After 5 seconds, it's just static. Well, it is wiggling, but that's because we have the wiggle set. But we can control where it should start. So at frame 0, it's going to be at 0 in Z position. And then at 5 seconds, it's going to be at 100 in Z position. I just want to go over the wiggle really quick with you. What that's doing is it's creating this subtle camera move within the camera move. And it just creates a little bit more organic feel to it, and it does loop. So if you set the animate in out to 0 0 in Z position so that the camera's not moving except for the wiggle, it will loop. It'll create a perfect seamless loop for you based on the duration you set. And you can control how much wiggle happens and how often that frequency happens. Even though it says 0, it is set. It's just you can't see it until you click on it. So we'll twirl that back up. So let's say, for example, we wanted it, instead of the camera animating towards the neon, let's say we wanted to animate away from the neon. So what we're going to do is go 100 and 0. So now it's going to start in the Z position at 100 and go back to 0. I'm just going to kind of scrub forward a little bit so you can see that happening. So I know it's jumping, but you kind of get the idea. And it's the exact same for animate left or right or up or down. So you can control the duration, the start, and the end of those points. And again, no keyframes, which makes it even faster. Finally, we have the camera options. So within these animations, you can't animate these, but you can fine-tune them for the animation. So you can individually control the X position, Y position, Z position, or rotation, all the basic elements of the camera. But this last one I just want to mention, you can enable depth of field on this template. It's just really slow to render, and the whole project is set up for speed. So I didn't even include any examples in the demo of using depth of field because I don't think it's necessary, but the option is there if you want to use it. Next, let's dig into the scenes. So let's twirl down scenes, and the first item we have is background. And here's all the presets for you. Now your version's gonna have a whole bunch more than this has, but you get the idea that we can just really quickly go in and change the background to a bunch of different options and see what we like and don't like for backgrounds and textures. And it's just a really cool way to kind of freshen up the look of your project. Darkness, so you can go in and fine-tune how light or dark the background is in your scene. And what I really like about this is that you can go pretty light with it. Now by default, I don't have the neons automatically adjusting the brightness based on the darkness of the scene. I wanted you to have to go in and manually do that because I did try automating it, and you can only get it so far. It really takes a human touch to be able to go in and get it to the right settings. But luckily it's really easy to do. You just go to the bulb brightness or to the glow amount and just lower them until it looks right with the scene. So maybe something like that. And we still have the mount and wires are too dark. We'll adjust that in the next tutorial, but you kind of get the idea. But I'm going to circle back quick to the off lightness. So if I bring the current time indicator to frame 0, we can see that this is way too dark. So we're going to go to the neon and then to the off lightness, and we're going to bump that way up. So something like that that looks way more realistic. So we'll go to that. So I think it looks pretty nice. All right, so that is I'm going to undo a bunch of these steps I just did so we get kind of back to the darkness that we had. Next we have edge highlight opacity. Now I'm going to bring up the demo for this for a second so you can see what's happening. This is where the edges are happening along a strong contrast area in your background. So we have these tiles and this really dark spot between the tiles. So where the dark spot meets the tile, it will automatically add an edge highlight to kind of illuminate out to make it scene look a lot more realistic, like the neon, the brightness is catching the edge of these elements. So next we have position. So you can move the position of the background over if you want, scale it up or down. You can adjust the shading of the scene. I'm going to turn it so that the neon is off on frame 0, and I'm going to turn shading all the way down. Before, after. So shading is really like the shadows that the neon is creating, and it just adds that extra bit of realness to the neon if there are actual shadows coming off of it. Reflection. So maybe if the background is wet or you just want it to pop a little bit more, you can increase the reflection. And that's not really visible until the neon's on, but you can kind of see it behind there, like right here in the scene. Okay, so we'll undo that. Next we have film grain. So there's a really subtle film grain that's happening when you render it out. I'm going to bump this way up, so I don't think you should go this high, but just so you can see what's happening in the scene. You can adjust it if you want fine grain or medium grain that's a little bit chunkier. And fine grain, and just a little bit goes a long way. I'm going to bring that back to 2, just so that it's noticeable, but so it's really subtle. Next we have shadow overlay. Now, I really think that this adds a lot to the final look. So if I increase the visibility for a second, we can see that there's like this shadow of a tree in the background. So I have 20 shadows set up for you that this is like a windowsill. This is another kind of like blinds maybe. So like it looks like the neon's right against a wall. And this just adds a little bit more visual interest and contrast into the scene with very minimal work. Okay, next we have gradient options. So if from the background you chose gradient, this is where you would adjust those options. So maybe you want it to be a brighter color in the scene. You can set that up here. And then finally we have custom scene. Now this is for the Premiere Pro version, so you can't even edit this, but in After Effects all you have to do is just take your background, if you want a custom background, drag it into the project panel, and then we're going to go down to background, the very last layer. We're going to double click into there and then double click into background construct. And within here, we're just going to click, drag, and drop our background. Hit S, scale that. Maybe we want to position it, whatever you want to do, and then go back to Neon Titles, the main composition, and there is your custom background. All right, that's everything for scenes. Let's go over extras next. So I'm going to drill down extras. The first one we have is the wires. So you'll see that auto wires is enabled by default, and that's what's creating these automatic wires. But let's say that you're not quite getting the results you want. You can go in and fine tune and manually customize the wires. So I'm going to turn off auto wires, so there's no wires, and I'm going to turn on custom wires. So that added wires, but what's happening is it's from this custom wire source text. So if I type in neon, this is the exact same results as what we were getting before. But watch what happens. You can add more characters, doesn't matter what it is, and it will add more wire in there. Now, the width of the text is still determining kind of the size of the wires, but it gives you a really cool way to customize and make multiple lines. And let's just do one example really quick because I want to show you how powerful this is. So I'll type neon example in here. So it will have 2 lines of text, and maybe we'll take the line spacing up a little bit more. Now I'm going to go down to this and just type in some random characters in here. There. Okay, so that looks actually pretty good, except for like this first line looks like the wires are too long. So let's delete a couple letters from there, and now we have the right length. Now all we have to do is adjust the line spacing. So we'll make that shorter, maybe even more shorter, something like that. And we'll just bring up the position there. And you might be wondering, why doesn't this just work automatically? And behind the scenes, it's such an annoying problem, but the defaults are not consistent. And because of that, I can't consistently get the wires to line up perfectly. So that's why I have this option for you to customize them. So I'm going to undo a whole bunch of these steps and then go back to where we were when we first started on this. So you can adjust the choke of the wires. So maybe if they're too thick or too thin, you can go in and adjust how thick or thin you want the wires to be. You can adjust the color of the wires. So maybe it's a scene where you want the wires to be lighter. You can adjust the illumination that's happening on them. So like if we zoom in, you can see that there's illumination happening on the wire. And we can turn that down so that before, after. And the illumination fall off is like how far should that illumination happen on the wire, depending on how thick or thin your wire is. Next, let's go to mount. And we can see that first we have the mount color. So if we want to lighten or darken that within the scene or change the color, we have enable horizontal on. So we can turn that off, and that's how you would turn off the mount. We can adjust the count of the bar. So right now there's 3. So maybe if we want like 4, for example, that's how we'd adjust that. We can adjust the size. So maybe if we want them thinner, we can move that down. They're a little more subtle. We can adjust the height beyond the standard height that they are if we want. Or we can adjust the width, right? So then we have the vertical bar settings. We'll turn that on for an example. And you can see like the size, maybe we want it to be thicker. You can adjust the height, the width, and the count just like the horizontal size, right? So I'll turn that off. Next we have glass. So this is kind of a cool feature. If you turn glass on, you can see that it creates this glass around the neon. And it has some really nice illumination and reflections that are happening when the neon is off as well as when it's on. You can adjust if you want it to like kind of contour to the neon, or if you want it to be square. You can extend out the neon. You can adjust the opacity, the off opacity. So like when the neon is off, how bright do you want it to be, or visible do you want it to be rather? The scene reflection, so there's some reflection happening to make it look more realistic within there. The neon reflection, so like how much reflection should the neon have on the glass? The edge opacity, so that's when the neon is turned on, how bright do you want this part of it to be? The edge thickness, and then the edge angle, so you can adjust the angle that's happening, because technically it's not actually projecting light onto the edge. It's created from a bevel alpha on there, so you can adjust like maybe if you want the light source to be from a different angle. Next we have the brackets. So these are the brackets right here, like these black parts there. If I turn them off, you can more clearly see what the brackets are. It just adds a little bit more organic visual element to the neon. So you can adjust the color of them. You can make the choke larger or smaller so they're more visible. You can adjust the position. So let me just show you, for example, if I move the position, that will move and make all kind of new random points for them. Next, we have the secondary text. Now, I knew that this would be a highly requested feature of having multiple text instances, so I did include it. The reason why I didn't have it up top here, though, is because it's quite a bit heavier to work with a project with 2 text instances open at the same time, just because of all the expressions and everything that's happening. So just know there's a sacrifice with this. If you turn on a secondary text, it's going to be a little bit slower to work with. Now, not terrible, but slower, like noticeable. So let's turn this on for a second, and there's really not a lot to go over with this because it's pretty much the same thing as the other one. It's just all the features like in this drop down. So we have all the color, text, position, tracking, all the stuff we've seen before, except for the secondary text has its own mount, its own wires, and all the settings associated with that, which is kind of what makes it heavier, right? Because you have to individually create all these secondary like mountain wires for that text as well. It won't just like work with the first instance as well. So I'm gonna turn that off, and we'll go next to color. So if you want a section of your neon to have a custom color, you can enable that. So you can have 2 colors within there. How you edit this is just like with the animators. You turn edit mode on, and you can see that color within there, and you can adjust the size and the position color within there. So I'll turn that off. Next we have glint. This is kind of a cool little feature that I personally really like. If you turn that off, you can see that it's kind of happening right here and back on. It's this RGB kind of color overlay that's happening on the neon. I'll isolate it here for a second so you can see it by itself. So you can adjust the opacity of that, you can turn it on or off, adjust the scale and the position of it. And then finally we have the transformer and wires. So this is another really cool feature that I just saw in a bunch of neons that I liked that I wanted to include in it. So you can turn a transformer on, and it just makes it look a lot more real. I have 2 transformers that I created for this, and you can adjust the size and the position and move them all around within the scene. Maybe the scale's a little bit small for this, so I'll move it up to like 40. There, so that's a little more realistic size to it. Now you can adjust the darkness, the lightness, but we have this really cool feature that I added with the wires. So there is separate wires all by themselves that you can adjust. So maybe like you want wires coming from the transformer up to the neon. So you just adjust the wire top length. Because maybe like we want this wire to connect into there. So we just increase the height a little bit, and that's in there. Maybe you want to move the whole thing over. So we move the position over a little bit so that it's kind of like hiding that wire behind there. Maybe we want the wire to, instead of coming from the bottom, we want it to be coming from the right side. So what we're going to do is move the bottom length all the way to 0, and then the right length all the way over. There. Now, it's worth noting that you can disable the transformer and just enable the wire, right? So then it's just like a wire coming from there. So maybe we want the right one to be gone and the top one to be gone, but the bottom one to go to the bottom. So you can see what's going to create with this, and then we can move this up and over a little bit more, and then it's going to have this wire coming from the neon to the bottom, which makes it kind of feel more real, because I mean usually a neon has a wire connected to it. All right, so that is all the extras. Next, I'm just going to go over rendering the project, and we're all set. All right, so let's say that we're all done, and instead of the full 30 seconds to render out, we just want 8 seconds to render out for our final neon. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to 8 seconds on the timeline. Sometimes it's hard to get exactly when you're scrubbing. And then you're going to hit N to end it at 8 seconds, and then you're going to add it to the render queue. So on a Mac it's Control Command M, on a PC it's Control Option M. I'm not quite positive about that, but just in case, you can always twirl down Neon Titles and then go to Neon Titles and then go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue, and set your render settings. Now I use a paid export called After Codecs to render H.264 directly out of After Effects. If you have access to it, I always recommend that you can use QuickTime ProRes if you have it again. QuickTime, and then Format Options, bring that over here. Apple ProRes 422 HQ. If you don't have that, you can always do uncompressed with like QuickTime, Format Options, Animation, and hit OK. And then render that out. And then once you've rendered that out, I'd bring it into Premiere, do any final editing you want to the neon, maybe brighten it or add some curves or whatever, or your audio, and then export out for H.264. Because remember, we want to export out as high resolution as possible from After Effects, and then export out our final version from Premiere Pro or Final Cut or whatever you're using. All right, you guys, that's everything. I really hope you enjoy using this product. And if you have any feedback, any questions, you're running into any issues, I'm just a quick email away. support@thomaskovar.com. All right, thank you very much again, you guys. Have a great day. And again, you need me, just send me an email.